Okay, here's the scoop. My son is homeless, so I graciously offered my home for him and his wife, who, by the way, has been a stay-at-home mother her entire existence since they've been married. And, well, my son was very successful, but he's having hard times. So I opened up my home. I simply made one request. If his wife was going to stay at home, she needs at least to get a part-time job. Not a big deal, and she needs to make dinner for her kids. I don't need to be cooking everything with my groceries. Do you think I'm crazy for that? Well, she sure does. Guys, you won't believe what she has to say. Hey, I'm not much familiar with the application on here, but I always read this sub and tried to give my best advice. I didn't really imagine that I would also be one of the people posting here and asking if I'm the a-hole, but here it goes. I'm 52 and I'm widowed and have 2 kids. The first one's married, while the second is still studying. My firstborn, let's call him Mike, moved out after he got married to my daughter-in-law, let's call her Susan. My secondborn is also married and is currently taking her master's degree, and is living with her husband. For a while, after Mike and Susan's wedding, things were good between us. We had dinners together, celebrated holidays, and shared updates about our lives. Especially since Susan was carrying my grandson, and I wanted constant updates to make sure that she was doing okay. I always sent them groceries, food, and I cooked, and all those things I could give them. But gradually the calls became less frequent and their visits seemed to dwindle. At first I forced my brain into thinking that they were just settling into their new marriage and finding their rhythm, but when Mike and my grandson, who was 17 at the time, stopped returning my calls altogether, I could not help but feel like something was wrong. It just stopped. There was no real explanation, no falling out, just silence. I tried reaching out, but everything felt forced. I tried visiting them, but nobody was always in the house, or I would not be welcome, saying that they had other visitors and that they were about to go somewhere even though they were just wearing PJs. I didn't want to pressure them, so I just let it be. But I won't lie, it hurt. I missed my son and grandson and felt like I didn't even know who my grandson was becoming. I didn't even notice it, but the months with no contact with him, it turned into years, and I guess I just got so used to it that I didn't even bother reaching out so often. During holidays or celebrations, I would just send them greetings or gifts, and that's it. I'm not even expecting a reply, so I was really surprised when out of the blue I get a call from Mike and Susan a few months ago. They had lost their home and they needed a place to stay for a while, and as mother, how could I say no? Without hesitation, I told them that they were welcome to move in. I was genuinely happy that they were coming back, even if it was under unfortunate events, because I saw it as my chance to reconnect with them and spend time as a family again. Although it really hurts me when I realize that the only reason they recommended with me was because they needed my help. They needed me, not wanted me. But who am I to turn down this kind of opportunity? Anyways, the first couple of days felt normal. They were trying to settle in while I was trying to make sure they had everything they needed. Of course, it was awkward during the first months. Imagine bringing together people who have not been in contact for years to live together. To be honest, seeing them was heartbreaking. They were slightly thin, barely had belongings left, and could not even afford to change the oil in their car. That's why I was willing to do anything to help them get back on their feet. At first, everything was fine. I gave them the guest room, cooked meals, and tried to make them feel at home. Susan mostly kept to herself, and Mike seemed preoccupied, and I didn't push myself to them, though. I thought that they just needed time to adjust. But our dynamics can't be like that forever. We needed to work together with 4 people in that house now, and the chores and expenses piled up. It was just me before, so everything was manageable. But now the grocery bills have quadrupled, and there has been a huge increase in water and electricity usage. I didn't mind at first because it was part of helping my family and allowing them to save up in the meantime. But soon I realized that I could not handle everything on my own anymore. That also made me think, why were they even homeless in the first place? I know Susan is a stay-at-home mother, but my son has a good-paying job, so how did they end up like this? I guess I still cannot bring myself to ask them because it's a topic that's a bit too sensitive. First, I suggested that maybe she could look for a job to help Mike with the savings and start contributing to the expenses. And that was the first red flag I saw. I explained that since we had more people living here now, I was finding it a bit difficult to keep up with everything, especially since I was still working. But she insists that she's a stay-at-home mom for her 17-year-old son, even though my grandson barely spends any time at home and flat out refuses to look for a job despite the free housing and meals that she's now receiving. I opened that up to my son and asked for his help to convince Susan to look for a job. But I just found out that he has been asking her to work since he can no longer sustain the life Susan wanted. At that point, I just gave up on the idea. But it made me think that is one of the reasons why they got homeless. Anyways, as an alternative to lessening my load, I asked Susan if she could help out a little around the house. Maybe help with cooking or cleaning, and I thought it was a reasonable request because, like I said, they were staying rent-free. Susan smiled and agreed, but that's when things started to go downhill. Susan starts helping with chores, but it seemed like everything she touched was sabotaged, and the first few times she helped, everything went wrong. She broke 2 plates while washing the dishes and burned breakfast so badly that the entire house smelled of burnt toast and meat for hours. She split laundry detergent all over the floor and accidentally shrank my favorite sweater. I thought it was just an accident, but then it happened again and again and again. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But at the same time, I was getting frustrated and I could not keep cleaning up after her. The mess was becoming so overwhelming to the point that it was intolerable already. Because of her constant clumsiness, I started to suspect that these were not accidents after all. On top of that, Susan never apologized like she meant it. Instead, she acted like she was doing me a favor by helping her even though her quote help was causing more work for me. You know what I think? Weaponized incompetence. So my question to you beautiful people, would I be the a-hole if I call out my daughter-in-law for her weaponized incompetence, or am I overreacting? Please let me know in the comment section down below. Update number 1. Oh boy, it's been a while, and I've wrote this post to share what's been going on since my last updates. I've seen your comments, and I want to express my gratitude to those who commented on my entry. Well, a few of you said that I should have set stricter boundaries and arrangements from the start, while others insisted I should never let them in at all after they abandoned me. For years. But I did what I felt was right as a mother. Also, what's done is done, and I can no longer do anything about it. What I need now is some advice on handling the current situation and figuring out how to move forward. Anyways, as many of you suggested, it would not be wrong for me to confront my daughter-in-law, and I need to do that if I wanted to continue living with them peacefully. So that's exactly what I did. And lo and behold, things just got worse. So last month, I eventually sat down with Mike and Susan to talk about all the concerns. I didn't want to be too harsh, but I gave them an ultimatum. And that was, if things didn't change, I might have to ask them to leave because not only was Susan wasting food and resources, but I was doing extra work just to fix what she helped with. After the conversation, Susan seemed to make an effort, or so I thought. When I returned home the other night, I heard her vacuuming in the living room, so I went straight to the kitchen to cook dinner after resting for a while. As I was about to start, Susan came to the kitchen and really insisted that she cook that night's dinner. So I just let her be and went to the living room to continue resting. In the middle of watching TV, I noticed the vacuum on the floor with its handle totally cracked and broken. Mind you, this vacuum was with me before Mike was even born. So when I was about to confront her in the kitchen while holding the broken vacuum, I realized that the dinner she was cooking was literally smoking. The rice was burnt to a crisp and the veggies were cooked so badly that they were barely edible. That's it. That's my breaking point. We barely even have food left and she's just wasting it. So I may have shouted and threatened to kick her out of the house, but I don't regret it. The shout was well deserved though. Then last week she apparently told Mike that I was verbally abusive and made her feel unsafe in the house. So Mike, who was already stressed out, confronted me about it. He said they would move out as soon as they could and that they would make sure to repay me for everything. He was not angry, but the tone in his voice was cold and I felt like I had lost him all over again. But I don't want to lie to myself. I knew I felt relieved when Mike said those words at the time. Because honestly, guys, I was just so darn fed up. I mean, I was fed up. And my emotions were all over the place. And here's where the situation got worse. I thought to myself that if they were leaving soon, I might as well start organizing the house for the day that they'd be gone. So, as I sorted through the house, I noticed a few of my belongings missing. At first, it was small things. A small decorative vase, a silver ashtray, decorative solid gold utensils, and little knickknacks. I didn't think much about it, but then I noticed more important items were gone. I even began checking on my own bedroom to make sure that most my prized possessions were still intact. Even though, I was confident that no one ever entered it. Jewelry that had been my mother's, a watch my late husband gifted me on our anniversary, and even a small envelope of cash I kept hidden in a drawer were gone. I checked every room, hoping I'd simply misplaced those items in frustration and exhaustion, but they were nowhere to be found. God forgive me, but he knows who I first thought it was. Update number 2. I can't believe it. I still cannot figure out who was the culprit behind my missing stuff. I know I look so horrible to you guys, a mother and a grandmother accusing her son's family of stealing her belongings. But can you blame me? Ever since they moved in, all of this stuff with monetary value is gone. They've done nothing but stress me out. It started a couple weeks ago. A few days after my last post, I noticed Susan's behavior becoming increasingly odd. She starts leaving the house late at night, sometimes sneaking out when she thought everybody was asleep. She always made sure that everyone's lights were off, aka when everyone was asleep. At first I convinced myself it was innocent. She was trying to relieve stress, and that Mike knew about it. Maybe she was meeting up with friends or talking on a walk to clear her head, but then she would come back with expensive-looking items and claim that they were gifts. A leather handbag, a mulberry silk scarf, and even a pair of designer sunglasses. How could she afford these things? Gifts from who? She didn't even have a job, and Mike barely had enough to cover their shared expenses. The math wasn't mathing. I started to connect the dots. My stuff starts disappearing, and then out of nowhere, she's flaunting all the expensive-looking stuff. You see where I'm going with this, right? The only thing that made sense at the time was to ask Mike because he's her husband. So he should know what's up, right? Well, guess what? He didn't. All he knew was those were gifts too. Isn't that a little too suspicious, or is it just me being paranoid and a horrible person? To make things worse, I heard her say something that would raise your eyebrows. Last week, I overheard her on the phone call when she was in the backyard and was whispering and talking in a hushed tone. I could not make out much, but one phrase stuck with me. "We'll have to keep him quiet if we want the money." My heart was racing. I was like, what? Who was she talking about? What needed to be kept quiet? I couldn't let it go. I had to know what was really going on. So I took a drastic step. I used some of my savings and installed hidden cameras around the house, except in the bathrooms and other private spaces. It felt like the only way to get answers. It's my house, so I have every right to protect it, don't I? Anyways, to make sure Susan felt comfortable enough to let her guard down, I told them that I would have a weekend getaway with a few friends so they could have those house by themselves. But the truth is, I'll just stay in a friend's house and watch the cameras. I wanted her to think that she was free to do whatever it was she was hiding. I even justified it to myself by thinking that these cameras also serve as security, because I kept seeing these strange people that often loiter around the house, and it scared the hell out of me. It's been creeping me out, and I figured the cameras would serve a dual purpose, but honestly, Susan's behavior worries me way more. So yeah, I'm just here at my friend's house waiting for something to happen. Whatever those cameras reveal, I'll make sure I'll find the culprit and make her pay. But I keep thinking, did I do the right thing? Can I get sued for installing those cameras on my property? What would you do if you were in my position? Update number 3. Okay, so after my last updates, I realized I messed up. So many of you said that I probably should have gone straight to the police and reported that sketchy guy, and honestly, you guys are right. Nevertheless, I have some news about him. Despite using a huge chunk of my savings, installing the cameras was the best decision I ever made. As I constantly monitored the cameras, there wasn't much at first. Susan was just doing normal household stuff, and basically just chilling in the house. But then I hit the jackpot. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was trying my best not to go ahead and doze off. I noticed Susan sneaking into my room after her husband and son fell asleep, and then she went through my stuff like she already memorized where things were placed. She went straight to the jewelry box, which was, mind you, hidden in the back of the closet that I could not even reach out easily and sometimes forgot it was there. My stomach churned as I watched her rummage through my stuff, pulling out piece by piece that I haven't even realized were there. Of course, I recorded the whole thing, and then it got worse. The next day, as usual, I was keeping an eye on Susan when I noticed that she had something handed to my grandson. The footage wasn't clear enough to see what it was, but I'm confident that that was my stuff. My own family taking from me? After everything that I've done for them? Ah, man. Still, I felt like it was not enough to prove that Susan had been stealing from me. I needed more. That's when the sketchy man came back into the picture, literally. Later that day, the camera by the front door caught him by the fence, so I was keeping my eyes on him. That's when I noticed Susan sneakily going to the man. The next thing I knew, she was handing some of my stuff, yes, my stuff, to that sketchy guy outside, and he gave Susan some cash. That was it. Susan was selling my stuff, and as it turns out, he's not a sketchy guy, but was just some loyal customer of hers. Yesterday, after I got back from the weekend getaway, I spotted him down the street, so I mustered the courage to approach him even though I was scared as hell. He was defensive at first, but when I bribed him with a little bit of cash, his attitude became friendly and split everything. Apparently, Susan had been pawning and selling my stolen items through him, but that wasn't all. He also supplied her with drugs. Yeah, drugs. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't let it go. Drugs? Drugs are too much. Me and my son are working our butts off to pay bills, and here she is selling my stuff and wasting it on drugs. The most sensible thing to do is confront Mike and Susan, so I did. As expected, Susan denied everything. Mike, ever the loyal husband, accused me of making things up and taking the word of a stranger over his wife. I guess part of Mike's reaction was my fault because I left a copy at the CCTV at my friend's house, so I could not solidify my claims. But I would not let this pass. I don't care if my own son doesn't believe me. Susan is stealing my stuff, endangering our security, and it's not a good role model to my grandson. So I gave them an ultimatum. Either Susan moved out by the next day, or they both would have to leave except my grandson so he could have a roof on his head. The house was mine after all, and, well, I didn't want to punish the child. They've crossed my boundaries so many times, and enough is enough. Sure, after they moved out, I, just could let this go and hope Susan disappeared from my life, but I know better. People like her don't just stop, so are the videos from the camera enough to report Susan? Maybe there's someone here who can tell me if I have enough to press charges. What would you do if you found yourself in my position? Would you keep fighting, or would you let it go? Update number 4. So, it's been a few months and there's a lot that's happened that I could not find time to write an update for. Anyway, Susan is worse than I thought she was, but rest assured that justice was served. The same day I confronted Mike and Susan, my grandson found out what happened right away, so he did not come home for a night. And to say that we were stressed would be putting it lightly. Fortunately, he went back the next day, but his face was pale and his eyes were red, as though he had not slept or eaten. When he finally broke down, what he revealed shattered what little tiny hope I had left for Susan's redemption. I mean, come on. Apparently, she had been forcing him to sell stolen items, and even if he didn't want to do it, Susan threatened to kick him out if he refused. How could a mother manipulate her son? I was heartbroken so much that I cried with him. I could see the guilt and shame all over his face, but I reassured him the best that I could and told him it was not his fault. Later that day, I brought my grandson to a hotel and messaged Mike to fetch us so we could all talk privately. Fortunately, by the time my grandson went home, I had already had my hands on the footage of Susan's mischiefs, so I now have all the evidence against Susan. After our heart-to-heart talk, he was now determined to leave her after what she had done to their son, to me, and to our family. He finally started to see her for who she really was. Took him long enough, but hey, better late than never. On the way back to my house, we stopped by the police station and filed an official report against her. The officers took one look at all the evidence I had assured me that I had a solid case. It felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders, knowing that Susan would get what she deserved. They asked us to head home while they prepared to make an arrest, so when we arrived at the house, police officers were waiting nearby. They accompanied us inside to assure everything went smooth. Susan completely was clueless about what was happening, was sitting in the living room like nothing went down. But the moment the officer stepped in and read her the charges, she tried to run for the exit and through the window in the kitchen. Like hell she could escape. When she was being escorted to the police car, she was crying and shouting and tried denying everything. Of course, and even had the audacity to accuse me of lying. But the officers weren't having it. Her crocodile tears didn't save her, and before she was removed from my eyesight, she kept shouting about how this was all a misunderstanding. Really? She's a lost cause. Finally, it was over. And as soon as Susan was gone, the house felt lighter and quieter. Mike looked horrible and devastated, but also relieved. He filed for divorce the very next day, and he didn't even hesitate. I think seeing her arrested opened his eyes to the kind of person she was. Anyways, we're just waiting for the start of the court proceedings. I'll update you ASAP. To everybody who encouraged me to stand up for myself, thank you. And to anybody dealing with a similar nightmare, don't let anyone take advantage of you. Stand your ground. You deserve better. Update number 5. My update's long overdue, but I want to give you guys some closure. Of course, the court ruled in my favor, which means Susan has to pay back everything she stole. I don't expect to see it, but knowing she's been held accountable, that's enough for me. Anyway, she was found guilty of theft, possession of illegal substance, and child endangerment. And while the punishment wasn't as bad as I hoped, it was enough to keep her out of our lives for good. She was sentenced to 2 years in jail with mandatory rehabilitation. She also has a restraining order, so she is, legally not allowed to be near us in my home. My grandson's doing much better now, and he started therapy, and we're working on rebuilding trust. Her mother gave her a lot of trauma, so we're really working hard to make him feel better. But as we all know, those kind of things will leave a scar on you. Mike, on the other hand, has been working hard to rebuild his life and repair his relationship with his son. It's been tough, but therapy has been a huge help for both of them. My grandson, bless his heart, is slowly bouncing back. He's even started smiling more, and that's worth more to me than all the stolen jewelry in the world. Me? Nothing much has changed, except that I have my son and grandson with me now, and I've never been happier. As for Susan, the last I heard, she's trying to adapt to life behind bars and no one even visits her. I was hoping she would rot there for a long time, but it is what it is. One thing is for sure though, I'll make sure she never comes back in our lives. Anyways, here's my final word of advice. Family or not, your peace and dignity are worth fighting for. And if someone tries to take that from you, don't hesitate to stand your ground. You deserve better.